for some unknown reason.
Yeah, me neither.
YouTube won't let me do it. It just says, oh, there's something wrong. It must be at YouTube. I have no idea what they're talking about.
You can see it from inside StreamYard, though, right?
Got me.
On the right-hand side in the studio is the chat. I think that's how you have to enter it if you're...
Yeah, no, I've tried. It says join the chat, and it just gives me an error message every time. I'll try it again.
Connect. There are no errors in this room. Anthony Ramos, why don't you kick everything off?
Well, hey there. This is intended to be a live Q&A for anyone interested in neurofeedback. I know that many clinicians listen, but prospective clients, people just curious, are always welcome. And we have a various and users. So,
Joy Lunt, do you have a disclaimer?
We don't know nothing. Don't listen to any of this. Obviously, this is more for information, not direction in your own personal treatment. We are not interested in being your doctor or being your therapist. We are just here to make sure that if you have questions regarding neurofeedback, something about you and whether you're appropriate for neurofeedback, we're happy to entertain that based on the experiences that we all bring today.
We are here to make your primary care physician uncomfortable.
Not me.
We're here to make you your own expert in neurofeedback.
If you guys don't mind, I've heard Dr. Hill mention that he's got a few ways that you can address the skepticism when they ask you questions about the research, and some people say it doesn't work. I don't know if you've discussed this before, but I would be interested to learn more about it.
Yeah, I'm working on a more comprehensive review specifically for ADHD because I'm getting a lot of pushback from people who are saying, but Dr. Barkley says, and there's plenty of research out there for ADHD. Yeah. So I'm just trying to collect it and prepare the apologist sort of perspective well before I share that piece of it. In general, though, there's a bunch of very sane and obvious reasons why the literature lags behind the clinical impact by what I consider decades. One is that most of the clinical work is done in an individualized way, where you do assessments, you start someplace, and then as you do neurofeedback, you iterate in a direction to do goal congruent impacts, and you change what you're doing over time as the person has different goal priority, progress and symptoms, etc. And so what you end up doing is also varied and tends to be quite different one person to the next. You know, two athletes walk into the gym with similar goals. Different personal trainers may have a different path to get you there. And all of the research pretty much, and there are a couple papers that have exceptions, but pretty much they do the same protocols to groups of people. They don't individualize as they go. There are a couple that do individualized alpha frequencies, but for the most part, it's small groups of people doing the same protocols, you know, maybe two groups for active comparisons. And then you have this short-term number of protocols too. It often takes 30, 40, 50, 100 sessions sometimes for making really big changes where you can measure them on a bell curve at the individual level. And this just breaks down when you do the same thing across groups of people. So one is the lack of individualization, meaning the research does not reflect what we call neurofeedback as done by clinicians mostly. It reflects the cutting edge 1978 of neurofeedback, pretty much, you know.
And it's to your point, Andrew. It's the nature of science, and I think there's a difficulty for the layman to understand that science. If you're studying the effects of a medication, you have to rule out as many possible variables as you can to get an accurate testing of the effect of a medication. It makes sense. In neurofeedback, same thing. You know, Ruth Lanius will do PZ down because that's the protocol she's testing. It doesn't take into effect what you're saying is clinicians using their skill set to do different things with the same goal in mind to reduce the client's PTSD symptomatology, and that is I don't think it's a solvable problem.
It's not in terms of like testing discrete, A/B protocols. But you've already touched on the second question there, which is, studies are done for medications.
Right.
You can do blind placebo control. You can do active shams. You can do all kinds of stuff. The average size of a tier 1 level study these days, gold standard, about $5 million. And that's a fairly simple study with drugs. Right. Well, who owns neurofeedback? Who's going to spend $5 million to do the kind of studies, even if you could do them with simple models, which you can't? Right. So it's a very expensive landscape, a hill to climb in terms of the investment in the field. A bunch of niche software and hardware providers all playing in their field with very little pressure to create, at least historically, the tools are relatively primitive in terms of computing. It's starting to change a little bit, but not rapidly, not landscape wide. So we have the inability to do tailored work in some ways in the literature. We have blinding, placebo control as a problem in the literature. It's been very hard until recently to do sham controlled neurofeedback, placebo controlled. I did what was the first or second study that was placebo controlled for my dissertation work, and did the research in 2009, 2010, really recently, for technology that's 100 years old for EEG, 55 plus 60 years for neurofeedback. Just doing our first blinded studies a decade ago, really? 15 years ago? Kind of old now. But that's pretty recent for this kind of stuff. So that's 3 reasons. 4, there was a lot of well poisoning that happened. A lot, right? In the 70s and 80s. Sturman's research was in the 90s. It kept going, right? It hasn't stopped. Hasn't stopped, yeah.
Right.
But initially, there was a lot of pushback from epilepsy landscapes on Sturman's work, and then we got pushback on ADHD medication provider from medication companies on the CHAD. Sending two for a couple of years. They had full-time 2 physicians being sent full-time salaries to CHAD meetings to tour and just to poo-poo neurofeedback, the ADHD meetings. So
and also their friend Dr. Barkley.
Yeah.
Well, he may be outgrowth of that, yeah. And then I guess my last more common sense. I'm sorry.
He was way involved in the 95 or so.
He's now seen as the world leading expert in ADHD. So I mean, a lot of the people who are poo-pooing ADHD,
Barkley had a researcher who he worked with, Sandra Liu.
Yeah, I know Dr. Liu.
And Sandra Liu's done some very nice work in meta-analysis on ADD, ADHD, and neurofeedback and on medication, and has shown that ADD, ADHD treatments are equivalent to medication as far as the efficacy power. And but a lot of what you've been saying is almost arguments against the field. It's too small. The research isn't perfect and whatnot. I started in the field before there was any efficacy proof of anything. And if the technique didn't have dramatic power, I would have gone to do something else. I've been in the field 52 years. I've seen it mature.
It's a tough argument, though, when a parent comes and says,
I can
can't get
provide
on PubMed
for ADD, ADHD, I can provide briefs that were designed to take to insurance companies to demand parity. The good news is that the administration at this point has set it up so that healthcare providers have to provide parity for mental health. Now, it's going to be challenged, obviously, aggressively, but now the standard is that they have to provide it. And we can show efficacy level proof in written material that's been peer reviewed and have it adequate to meet the guidelines for Medicare. But it's going to have to be challenged, and it's going to be challenged basically as a class action circumstance, or it won't move forward.
Why is that evidence not percolated to the clients who phone us up? They're not finding it.
I send it to people all the time.
I think if they go to Google Scholar, they would be inundated. But yeah. Santiago's point was how can we make this to the public? Andrew, I have a question for you. When you're putting together all this information for the families, the parents, right?
Yeah.
Do you have a sense that they're actually reading any of it?
Yeah, because I don't give them a 20-paper review. I'm trying to figure out right now the best way to do that in a way that is not me droning on, and some of that is this, like how do I become an educator in psychology better for this topic? I'm trying to figure out the pedagogy here to like communicate some of the concepts that I don't see communicated well. But I mean, just to finish, the last reason why I think we don't have adoption, why don't we all have amazing cardiovascular health and abs? I mean, we kind of know how. It's a process. It's expensive. It takes a minute. It's progressive. With some of many of the things that we treat, so to speak, or train with neurofeedback, there are medications for, and so there's a shortcut or a palliative mechanism to not have to go through all the hassle and the stress and the effort, the sweat, effectively. So that's my last reason. Those are 5, I think, reasonable reasons, even if a couple are apologists about the quality of the field being a little bit niche still.
So I would say bottom line for the viewers and listeners is, number 1, invite your friends to come to this live forum if they're interested in learning about neurofeedback and they're on the fence. Because I think this is important for the people who are especially on the fence about it. It happens to me all the time. I want to do neurofeedback, but the jury's still out. So you can get your answers here. Bottom line is, does neurofeedback work? Yes, it does. Is there research to support it? Yes, there is. Now, I think that it's also important that we talk about 2 components to the neurofeedback. One is the conditions it can help. So I think that we can all contribute here by telling people, both from a research perspective, as Jay says, and then from the anecdotal subjective perspective. Because in my experience, at least, I remember many years ago, Jay, you helped me look at a case for cerebral palsy. And they came, I had never worked with it before. I didn't find a lot of research. I said to the family, this would be experimental at this point. We did work, and the client got better. Got better. Were they back to being quote unquote normal neurotypical? No. But the kid learned how to play the piano and learned how to read and write and did a lot of magnificent things. And so for all of us, we've taken on cases in which we say this is experimental and we see good results, and then we have the research. So I think it would be important for people to learn what conditions does neurofeedback efficiently help based on the research, and which ones we've seen anecdotally and subjectively where we can possibly help, and people can have some glimmer of hope. It may work, it may not, but at least they can take that leap of faith and try.
That's a nice context, Santiago. It's none of us are in the business of curing anything. I think that's just, something we should never actually say out loud. Doctors get to say that, perhaps. I'm not comfortable saying it. I'm comfortable saying that I am of faith that neurofeedback will have impact on almost anything that walks in my door that's brain-based. I don't know for sure. I probably can't prove it. There may not even been a scientific research done into it. I had a guy call me up with something I'd never heard of before, and I'm going to mispronounce it, of course, and it's called myelacia. Jay, I think I may have actually asked you about this, but it's nothing that's crossed my path. How would I? It's an extremely rare brain disorder, but do I have faith that the techniques that we apply to uplifting brain performance would have an impact for him? I do. I don't know to what extent, and I said that to him clearly. I have no idea. It's worth to me. It's worth a shot. I've seen more mysterious things happen, and I've heard anecdotes and stories from other clinicians about successes that they've had with seemingly intractable fill in the blank. So I just think the technique of neurofeedback is so profoundly general and specific at the same time that why not try it? It's not a medication that's going to make you, break out in hives. There's not a lot of quote unquote negative effects to what we do here. It's a training, it's a skill acquisition training platform. Give it a shot.
But John, you don't want to give an end result, but the parent wants to hear an end result. What end result can you give to a parent when you have a kid coming in, bouncing off the walls, and you go down the list of efficacy? They want to hear how long will it take? What can it do? Or should I just take a pill?
I'm going to step in.
Yeah, we already know the answer about the pill.
No, I love Pete. I don't think I've ever had a phone call with somebody asking questions about neurofeedback that didn't say, how many sessions will I need?
Right.
Let me ask you a question. Have you asked your psychiatrist the same question? How about your therapist? How about your gardener? Do any of those people have a hard and fast number for you? There's very little in the world. Your orthodontist can't even tell you exactly. Okay. So I approach that question from that aspect. There is no reasonable answer. I haven't met you yet. I can't even take a guess. What I do tell people, because they have to have something, if you come into my office and you have a garden variety limited to ADD situation, it's going to take us somewhere around 40 sessions to get to the point where you've got your improvement. But beyond that, I'm assuming you want this to stay. So then we're going to have to titrate away from it and make sure that your brain can hang on to this new capacity. So I'm doing numerical measurements every session of every frequency. And I'm looking every time you come in. Did you hold on to that? Did your brain remember how to do that? And are you getting the same gains? Because if you get those gains and your numbers look good and you're getting 2 weeks between sessions, I can tell you confidently that 25 years from now, you're going to send me a postcard or say, hey, I'm still doing great. So I think we have to be less shy about having to limit ourselves to how many sessions it will take. You know, I've started telling people the concept of 20 sessions, 40 sessions is a myth. You know, don't read that and assume it applies to you.
So I don't know whether you're seeing the streaming screen.
We are.
Yes.
We are.
This document is. I've got to go to the document myself as opposed to the streaming in order to stream it. But the document is from 2020. It's professionally produced. This is essentially a brief intended to be an argument for the use of neurofeedback in behavioral health. And it's very well constructed. I have a disclaimer that I've got a piece of this, but you can see Martijn Arns, who publishes everything everywhere, David Cantor, who's brilliant and has been in the field as long as I have been, Donna Jackson. She's the Angels and Assassin author. Fred Schaefer, obviously BCIA folks should know him, and Mark, who is probably one of the key people to put this thing together. An executive summary, but it's a general introduction about neurofeedback, evidence-based for ADD, ADHD. They do a very nice job going through. There's a gigantic document here, looking at the research, how long does it last, how can we get better access to it? This is details of how it works. This document is something that I hand out, and in the appendages at the bottom, basic stuff. What's different brainwaves, EEG electrode placements. Also, this is a great resource to hand to the doubting parent. And it covers ADD and it covers it, I think, really quite well. So I would suggest that we're not without resource to hand to folks. It's just that a lot of folks in the field don't necessarily track all the documents that are available. And again, this is 2020. It's only a few years ago that it was produced, and it wasn't produced necessarily to be distributed to people in the field. It was specifically to argue in front of insurance panels. So anyway,
okay, Jay, I've never seen that before. It looks amazing.
It is amazing.
Can I get a copy? B, can we distribute this freely?
Yeah. And
yes.
Amazing.
I've never tried to bury stuff under bushels. I've tried to shine the light wherever we could, including sharing it with folks on panels like this. So
is it on the ISNR homepage?
I haven't been involved in ISNR since I've been able to travel. So
that was rhetorical.
I'm past president, but I'm emeritus on everything. I'm retired. So you can't expect me to be out there doing the lifting at this point. My tissue won't take the heavy lifting anymore. I've been on steroids for 35 years now. I tried to bump the screen door open a little bit. I got a gigantic hematoma on my forearm on the other side of it here. Just touch me and I break. So I can't do the heavy lifting, but I'm more than happy to kind of point people towards some of the resources.
Well, please, I'd love a copy.
I think it's important not to just go after
futures. John, the name of the company is Brain Future.
I can just go download this. Okay.
I'll email you a copy. I have one.
Very pro neurofeedback friendly. It's not all they talk about, but they are very friendly and supportive of neurofeedback. Yes.
Awesome.
So somewhere along the way, efficacy comes in there, and there's an implication that there's an end game to whatever the symptom is. And when a parent goes in and you tell them, well, I don't know what it is, I understand from the clinician point of view, but from the parent point of view, we're being led in there because we think that, hey, for ADHD, there is 20 sessions or whatever it is, there's a number in there, and there's a book that you go to that says, well, you have ADHD here with a 5, and you have autism over here. That's a 2 or a 1. One of them is easier to train, one is harder than the other. How do you explain that to a parent?
By not being tied to the diagnostic label. And that also gets into John's perspective about not treating, not being doctors in this role, not being medical. If we, instead of talking about the DSM labels, talk about the brain resources themselves, which are underneath the level of diagnostic label, they're still valid, but I can talk about your rumination, your perseveration, your inattentiveness, your impulsivity, your speed of processing, yada, 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 and valid. And you can show someone that resource in data. And what I tell them is we make about a standard deviation of change on the QEEGs, on the performance testing, in the thing we train, every 20, 25 sessions on average. And that actually undershoots. I give them that's a somewhat conservative guess, and tell them if there's big brain injuries or major illness or developmental stuff, it can move half that slowly often. Schizophrenia.
lack of proper nutrition.
I'm less worried about diagnosis than I am about prognosis. I mean,
right.
Diagnosis,
but you have to talk to
categorization, and that's you've got to do something like that just to get paid. But EEG, QEEG is not very specific, so we're not going to have proven efficacy as well as we're going to have proven clinical utility. And we have tremendous clinical utility in managing brain function. We can teach people to stop having seizures. We can improve ADD. We can improve attentional skill sets and affective skill sets. We have great clinical utility. I'm not worried about the diagnostic specificity because that's trying to match to a standard
but that's what parents
dying.
are Googling when they're looking for stuff, so
and the doctors who are going, I mean, imagine being a psychiatrist and you've been told that the ground you've stood on for the last 50 years of your career is now not valid. How else are you going to work? We're not going to do DSM, we're going to do ICD, the ICD codes. Well, that's behaviorally based categorization of another categorization set. It's no different.
So I'd like to talk about what Pete asked about, because that's what I do every day in my office. I work with kids, I work with families, I work with people saying, this is going to make it so we can't have a summer vacation. Is it really worth it? I mean, that's kind of at the end of the day what you want to know, right, Pete? So here's what I tell people. Look, no one, and I do speak of over 30 years of clinical experience, no one has ever said to me, can you make the diagnosis go away?
I get that question all the time.
They're not interested in making the diagnosis go away.
I get that question all the time, seriously, and I have to backpedal and be careful with it. But I get that question every single week.
That's weird.
Every single week, someone says, "Is it possible he won't have this diagnosis in a couple of years?" Every single week, some parent asks me a question about their kid because they care. It's got social status. It's about tracking their resources.
That's scary.
Guys, Santiago wants to interject.
Make the teachers stop calling me after school and complaining.
Yeah.
Make them have a reasonable report for me at the parent-teacher conference. Make my kid go to sleep in less than 3 hours a night. Make them, and they have specific life problems that they're worried about. And that is something we can track, because I tell them, all right, you need to pay really close attention. How long did it take him to go to sleep last night? And if you tell me it took 3 hours and that's typical, okay. But it has been my experience that a lot of parents need help with this because they're busy, their lives are overwhelmed. I had a family come to me. Their son was very ADD, very over the top. And we did 20 sessions, and I'm thinking, we're doing great. They didn't have much to report because, they have 3 kids and they're busy. But I'm thinking, yeah, but he walks in the room and he just sits down calmly and he sits in the chair. This is progress. I can see it. Okay. They came in after 20 sessions and said, yeah, we really haven't seen much help. So I think this is going to be our last session today. And I'm like, okay, that's fair. Can we go over some of the things you told me in our initial evaluation? Sure. We got to the question about sleep. This kid made the whole family go upstairs at 8:30 at night and go to bed because he wouldn't do that by himself. Then he spent the rest of the night visiting everybody's bedroom one at a time, waking the whole family up at some times during the night. Okay. So I got to that question and she said, just a minute. My husband is out in the car with the rest of the kids. We'll be right back. Turns out the kid wasn't making the 8:30 bedtime every anybody. He wasn't visiting houses. He was just like, they're like, we forgot to notice that.
Yeah.
Santiago,
we have a question. Yeah.
Again, it really has to do with people being conditioned to get a diagnosis. People are so used to getting a label. It's hard for them not to comprehend that that's not the whole point about this. Now, what I would like to say for the listeners is when people ask why a brain map, why neurofeedback, is why do you want to get a brain map? We want to provide a brain map service for you to help you understand why. Why are you feeling this way? Why are you acting this way? Why are you behaving this way? And how that's impacting your life. Because a client may come to us and say, I have been diagnosed with ADHD. I have been diagnosed with depression. I have been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. I have been diagnosed with PTSD. And you name the initials, they will bring them to you. I tell them, okay, let's take a step back. First of all, what is depression to you?
Yeah.
I feel sad. Well, a lot of people feel sad. Does it mean that everybody's depressed? So let's see how it is manifesting in your brain for you. I'm not comparing you to the rest of the population. I'm talking about you. Okay. We've all seen cases where people with depression have epileptiform discharges in the EEG. They've never had a seizure. They've never had a convulsion, but it plays into their symptoms. And how do we address it? We talk to the prescribing professional, and the prescribing professional suggests an anticonvulsant. It's very counterintuitive, and a lot of people will say, anticonvulsants for depression? Well, that's why we do a brain map, because that's how your brain is manifesting it, and now we know what it will benefit from. And
Guys,
so that's very important for people. Now, the second thing is the price versus the cost. The cost is how much money are you paying for our service? And how much are you paying us for us to work very hard to help your brain? So neurofeedback will cost you X amount of money. And that's what people consider. But people don't consider the price, which is the price you pay for not doing anything about it. How much will it cost you financially not to train your brain? How much will it cost you emotionally, behaviorally? How much will it cost your family? How much will it cost society for you not to take care of your brain? How much will it cost your siblings and your kids and your relatives and your friends? That's what people need to consider here. You're paying a lot of money, because neurofeedback many times is not cheap. But if you compare it,
Anthony, go.
Guys, we have a question from Tristan. And so once we agree on the efficacy of neurofeedback, can we agree on the most efficacious form, surface amp or Z-score? This was the question.
No such thing.
I would like him to ask, I would like, Tristan, if you're still there, I would like you to tell me what criteria we might use, because at the moment, this is a conversation that clinicians who've been doing this for a very long time are very interested in. And we have zero research. We have zero answers for you. If you take Loretta, Z-score, anything, the stimulant, the lens, all these, if you take them all, you're going to have to compare them.
Let me reframe their question here. Does carpentry work? Well, if carpentry works, what tool is best? Well, it depends upon what you're trying to do. And sometimes a hammer will be the thing, but sometimes the screwdriver, sometimes the saw. You might have a plane. I mean, there's a gouge. I mean, there's so many things, and a really good carpenter will have a tool belt with lots of tools that they're very good at using, and they can create masterpieces. You can sometimes find these people in clinical offices, not labeled with carpentry above the door, but with neurofeedback above the door. And the thing that they're working on isn't a block of wood. It's an organic living being that has to be optimized. And, it's going to take a variety of different tools for different tasks. So, find out whether the person that you're considering going to has experience in the area that you're considering having treated, and what tools they might use, and how did they get experience in that. Who's their supervisor or mentor, or treat it like a field, like carpentry, and the tools. That's basically what you're asking here. And at this point, depending upon what you're building, you're going to need different tools.
Sorry, John, but you also have to be mindful of the charlatans, because there are people promoting things like neurofeedback that are not neurofeedback, and they're very dangerous. And we spoke about this, I think, 2 weeks ago. So yes, but you have to make sure that your clinician is credentialed and is doing ethical and responsible work, and is using equipment that is state of the art and is considered valid clinically to work with you. Because you could work to anybody with a headband, and they're claiming to do neurofeedback, and they're charging you twice as much, and you're falling for it. And then in the end, you don't get any better, or you're going to get worse.
I was going to ask if part of Tristan's question about efficacy, are we looking for result? Are we looking for speed? Are we looking for cost? What are the elements that prompt that? It's a complicated conversation when you ask about efficacy. Tristan, if you're still on the line, if you can perhaps elaborate on the interest in that question. What is the efficacy measure that you're looking for? And we still can't answer it. Andrew I think it was last week or the week before, was very eloquent about talking about, in the hands of a good clinician, tools just work. They just work.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of brain master versus something else. Yeah.
You can, for many goals, you can get a lot of impact with almost any tool set. And there are a couple of, ways where things can get easier for certain tools, but I don't know. All the good clinicians I know have the ability to do work with whatever tools are in front of them. Give an amazing musician a crappy guitar and it sounds great. Yeah. You give somebody who doesn't know how to play music an elegant guitar and it sounds crappy. So,
all right, hold on, everybody. If the hammer is neurofeedback and the nail is ADHD, okay, Dr. Hill, with your scenario, if it's a 4-chord song, that takes not a lot of time to learn. Can't we go to a parent and say, you know what? If somebody has labeled your kid with that broad brush of ADHD, ADD, neurofeedback, the efficacy is a 5, right? You should be able to alleviate the symptoms in a shorter amount of time compared to autism. Can't we say
true? Yeah, that's true. I don't say we should be able to. I tell people what I've seen. It's slightly different.
And another piece that, to use Jay's analogy of carpentry, if neurofeedback was as old as the hills, the way carpentry is, we would have better answers. But we're still barely out of our toddlerhood. And the fact of the matter is, Tristan, if you go to somebody and they say, "Oh, the Z-score training is the best thing in the world for depression," they don't have a leg to stand on. We don't know. We literally don't know. The best you can do is say that provider has seen great results using that tool for that particular presentation.
Yep.
We haven't done any research to show that the hammer is good here, the screwdriver's there good. We haven't. We're still trying to figure it out. So
does Gunkelman look like a toddler?
If you rate our experience level and our knowledge level, yes.
I wanted to get back to something Santiago was banging on a moment ago about costs. And there's a bunch of data out there, actual research data on the cost of mental health. It's in the trillions of dollars. This is not a small matter. So, to make it personal about, got your family to consider. I'm about to spend $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 on neurofeedback treatment. If I don't, to Santiago's point, if I don't deal with this, what am I 40 years from now in my retrospective analysis of my life? I'm going to lose 40% of my potential income. I'm going to probably end up divorced. There's a whole bunch of true hard statistics on people going to, untreated mental disorders of all sorts. Higher rates of incarceration, higher rates of divorce, higher rates of cardiovascular events. It goes on and on and on.
It's not just the disease model. I get people all the time that are traders and that are like golfers and other elite athletes, where if you give them a slightly less reactive mode and more sustained focus, they make twice as much money that week.
Exactly.
Like literally, oh, thanks, Andrew. I just made an extra $100,000 this week because I wasn't chasing my loss yesterday. I feel so good. Oh, awesome. Pay me more. Buy more neurofeedback.
Yep, absolutely. It's a good point. Is the flip side of that, the increased potentials that people are going to have if they do this. They think they're fine. Peak performer. The peak performing crowd. Santiago's talked about that as well. The delicate balance that has to be struck between. I have a client right now who swears his success as an attorney is due to his methylphenidate. And I'm sitting here going, I'm not sure how to answer that.
Well, probably is, but it's not the only tool he could use to get there. Yeah.
Well, that's true. That's number one. But he has paid a cost for it on the other side. His interpersonal relationships are in a shambles because he's unable to disconnect from his workflow into his actual life flow. That the flow state dynamics question of the light switch that is available to be turned off and on when you need it. that neurofeedback can provide you the skill set to be able to do that the methylphenidate cannot. You're always on.
That was my question regarding cost. I'm going to play devil's advocate. Back to Pete's question about if I'm a mom, and Dr. Hill brought this up too. Medication does work for some people, and medication itself is, as I understand it, may not be that expensive. So we're telling them you need this many sessions. This is the cost. Why should the mom pick neurofeedback over medication that's being offered?
Which medication?
Yeah.
Thank you, Jay.
Let's take a peek at medication, and
we also don't get a good picture of that. Jay's going to tell us about that kind of stuff. So in 2005, Jack Johnstone arranged a day at UCLA. Andrew, you might have been there, of QEEG and neurofeedback. And the heads of many departments at UCLA attended. And one of the heads of the department was the head of the child psychiatry department.
Kraken.
And at the end, one of the evaluations, they were very cordial, and they were all very willing to accept neurofeedback as a good tool. But the child psychiatry group said, look, we need something beside these medications, because it turns out none of these medications have an effective life beyond 5 to 7 years. And if you start using them when you're 7 years old, by the time you get to college, you're out, and you haven't learned how to do any of the things that you need to do. So part of the medication story is they'll take care of you for a few years, and then you're stuck.
And there's studies showing that.
And which one of these medications might you respond to? Right. Methylphenidate, Ritalin, is a dopamine reuptake inhibitor, and it works if you have theta frontocentrally. But Vyvanse and Adderall are amphetamines, and they don't work for that frontocentral theta. They work for slow alpha at the back of the head. If the alpha is slow and you need an agonist, but if you don't need an agonist, if you're only slightly slow, a Strattera reuptake inhibitor might be working. Provigil works for people that have a primary disorder of vigilance. They just can't stay awake. It's like narcolepsy without a cataplexy. And it's not the same as the other people that need the other kinds of stimulants.
Just one caveat.
Some people have beta spindles and they need guanfacine or clonidine to reduce the beta spindles, or they might need something more potent for a worse beta spindle like gabapentin, which start to get into the anticonvulsants. And you might have discharges in the EEG and need an anticonvulsant. A third of the ADD, ADHD population have epileptiform discharges. You might end up on a more potent anticonvulsant. People sometimes are given lithium, which reduces beta, but it potentiates discharges. It's an anti-manic compound. Oxytocin reduces mu and enhances social bonding. And then there's the people that actually have frontal alpha, and they respond better to an antidepressant, an SSRI, if it's just regular alpha, SNRI if the alpha up there is slow. If the alpha is faster than 10 or so, then a tetracyclic. And beta can be reduced with antipsychotics as well, but they potentiate discharges. And if you have a third of the people with discharges, you have to be careful handing out antipsychotic based on the behavior of ADD simply.
Or modafinil. It's important to point out when you mention ADHD and modafinil in the same breath that Provigil has a dramatically increased risk of side effects in ADHD because of the histamine component. If you look at the first paper on using modafinil off-label called something like Approved and Investigational Uses, the dropout rate when used with ADHD was triple that of non-ADHD.
But that's when you use it for the diagnosis as opposed to the right person. If you have a primary disorder of vigilance, that's what you need. So it's not the same as having ADD. That's again, people in a diagnostic category and being given a medication for the category when it's only appropriate for a small subset.
But that's what's commonly done.
Today, if Dr. Hill and I today whipped up a batch of meds in the tub, like bathtub gin, and it brewed up really, really
People
good.
would believe it from us. That's the thing, Jay. We have to be careful. Like we are crazy iconoclasts. With
if it could fix 20% of the autism population, perfect, so that they couldn't be diagnosed at all with one dose. How could we prove that it would work at all? I mean, 80% of the autism population wouldn't respond to it. So it's a waste of time? No, it's the right drug for the right subset. Now, all we need to do is be able to find a pattern in the brain that tells you need this bathtub gin batch, not that bathtub gin batch, and you end up with matches to the patterns. If psychiatry examined the organ that they treat, and they don't, we'd end up having better outcomes and fewer side effects and less problematic withdrawal. It's an unfortunate circumstance, but psychiatry doesn't really look at EEG traditionally. The few psychiatrists that are getting good at looking at EEG even call themselves neurotherapists.
Jay, you brought up bathtub gin. I want to ask the panel this question. Maybe Google will pick it up and we get a bunch of people to watch us. Your choice is beer, weed, psilocybin. Which is the best of the three for your brain?
The dose makes the poison, so it depends on what you're talking about.
Are you driving?
Well, are you taking it for an intoxicant? Are you taking it for plasticity booster? Are you using it socially? Are you self-medicating?
You want to leave your state.
If you ignore all the other stuff, psilocybin actually has some positive effects on lots of brains, not all. People that have epileptiform content in their EEG or gigantic, greater than 20 microvolt beta spindles need to be cautious of entheogens. The likelihood of a bad outcome with ketamine, DMT, psilocybin, ayahuasca, which is DMT from a plant variety, but any of those can end up having bad outcomes, and your likelihood of a bad outcome is potentiated with epileptiform content and beta spindles, which also are the two features that predict medication response most likely in any medication. So it's not surprising that they predict bad outcomes in psilocybin.
LSD and psilocybin, everybody, because I don't know. I'm just the guy that edits this thing, but the closest thing to neuroplasticity is you're trying to reroute things. Isn't LSD and psilocybin the closest thing that can help your brain versus beer and weed?
There's an assumption there, though, that you need more plasticity. You don't, generally. You're making plenty of cells every day. The cells can move around every day. You need to shape your plasticity. But a lot of my biohacker clients, I back off on doing all of the things all at once because you create too much plasticity. You know, I get clients all the time showing up with side effects from having done too much lion's mane mushroom because it jacks up BDNF so high. They get side effects, depersonalized, sexual, anhedonia stuff. Because of the plasticity so high without shaping, the system reorganizes into a blunted state. And this can happen with you see this with elite athletes or elite musicians with their fine-grained skills. You can over practice and lose your skill because of the plasticity just wiping away the acquired, deeply learned skill. Happens in very, very elite, overtrained people where the pianist can't play anymore when she hits 16 because she's been playing 4 hours a day for her whole life. And suddenly the brain's like, screw you, I'm just wiping away all the learning. And this can happen. So the plasticity is never that constrained unless you're dealing with an acute phenomena. I think there could be cases where it's worthwhile using. But I would say for psilocybin, people are better used. The better use of it might be in the heroic, shamanic, ecstatic landscape, not the microdose every day to boost my plasticity. Dude, sit and meditate. Take 10 minutes. Go for a walk. Do some neurofeedback if you want to get fancy. You don't need to source risky psychedelics and dose every day. It's just not a reliable way to control your plasticity. That's my
Singapore. What do you guys say?
It all comes down to, I think, since we're speaking about medication, is which one is healthier for you, but you have to pay the price for. versus which one it's unhealthy for you down the road. And that means if you think about you want to gain muscle, which one is healthier for you, lifting or shooting up the steroids? Of course, weightlifting is going to take a long time. You have to work hard. You have to earn your way. You can do steroids, but what's the risk that you're running by doing that? It's more dangerous. To me, in the neurofeedback realm, a lot of people do need the medication, but the way I see it for many people is they opt for the medication because they want the easy way out. Neurofeedback takes time. It takes hard work. And most people, well, I wouldn't say most people, a lot of people today want to circumvent the hard work any which way possible. You know, I want to biohack by listening to pink sounds. I want to biohack by, submerging myself 3 minutes a day in ice cold water and doing this type of breathing. You have to understand that for you to get better mental health, it takes hard work. You go up and down. You have to sacrifice things. Okay, take the medication. Down the road, like Joy says, it's not going to work for you anymore. You're going to need a higher dosage. You're going to experience side effects. Are you going to be happy then?
Are medications necessary?
Yes.
Long term.
No.
For what?
For what? That's
lots
the
of things.
question.
No, okay. No. I'm with you.
I would be dead without meds.
No.
Hey.
No.
Ah.
Okay.
Better living through meds used to be the phrase. Now it's simply living through meds.
But in that scenario, Jay, let's say a kid with ADHD, do they need Ritalin for the rest of their life?
Right. That's
it won't work.
Anxiety, depression.
But John, okay, go back. You're assuming that if I take this medication, if I'm 10 years old, let's be ridiculously reasonable, wait till I'm 10. Am I still going to need it when I'm 25? Well, if you depend your behavior on that medication, you're still going to depend on it when you're 25. The problem is you will not be metabolizing it the same way. Your brain will go, that's not impressive anymore. I don't see any difference. So you'll probably end up with more side effects, less pleasant kinds of aspects of it. This is just the simplicity of the medication that we're dealing with for ADD and ADHD. Quite honestly, John, what do we have? We have people walking around. I get this a lot. People have been on their antidepressants for 12 or 13 years. Mm-hmm. And they're not really happy with it. It's better than it was, but it's not great. So they come for neurofeedback. And during the course of neurofeedback, before I caught on, these people suddenly decide they're much better. And so they just stop the antidepressants. And the consequences of doing that suddenly are often so bad that the people go right back on them because they cannot tolerate it.
Exactly.
So it has to be titrated. It has to be done very carefully with a prescribing physician. But you ask about medications. Okay, John, your new client who's coming in tomorrow has been told that unless their kid learns how to behave in 10 days, they're getting kicked out of school. You're going to do neurofeedback for them? No. You say, take him to the pediatrician, get some medication on board. Now, understand that the medication will not have to be used for a long time. Once we've taught his brain how to shape that plasticity into more effective and usable ways, you will be able to gently have a little bit less, live a little less, until the brain takes over and they don't need the meds anymore. But that's not the message that's sent out there. Russell Barkley is out there barking to he used to sell Ritalin from Ciba-Geigy. He took a lot of money from Ciba-Geigy. So,
I'm saying the chemical imbalance.
Vince Monastir did a very nice study in a school. And the kids that had high theta beta ratios were diagnosed with ADD. Half of them were randomly assigned into also not getting just the Ritalin, which was provided for the theta beta ratio being high. But half of them were assigned to also get neurofeedback. 6 months later, the meds were discontinued. The ones who are on meds only reverted to their ADD ways behaviorally. The ones who had neurofeedback remained okay. So it's possible to be put on them short run and take them away carefully to good effect. And withdrawing the wrong drug too fast is really quite problematic. You might think, well, the opiates or something, you have to be very careful. But even serotonin, SSRIs, serotonin withdrawal is extremely severe. So you've got to be very careful with any of the meds that you're on. Heroically just stopping them cold turkey is sometimes the worst thing you can imagine doing.
Dr. Andrew Hill, 80% of the people that you deal with are remote.
Yeah.
What are you, I don't want to say treating, what are you training? Or like when people, when you get that email inquiry, I need help with what are you responding with? What can you help with 80% of the people you talk?
So I'm reframing what we do into resources in the brain instead of diagnostics. I'm talking about 6 to 8 regulatory features of the brain. Attention, not ADHD. Stress response, not anxiety. And then within that, you have the perseverative, the ruminative, the social and sensory, or the hypervigilance. Sleep issues for onset or maintenance, not, dysomnia diagnostic. The resources are the same, but I'm more interested in, hey, can we find the resources you care about? Not what is that label? Hey, let's maybe drop below that label and figure out what success looks like. So I'm framing it into what resources are we operating with and which goals we're pursuing for you. And by doing that, especially with the brain map open, it's hugely supportive of agency and a shift in perspective. And people start reporting day to day progress towards goals or not the symptom level stuff the same way. They're not thinking of it as applied to them. So people might find out about neurofeedback because of ADHD or seizures or anxiety or trauma. But when they start talking to us, we're like, oh, wow, that trauma really sucks. Oh, it might be your posterior cingulate caught in high gear. If you look at a brain map, what you might see is posterior cingulate's lit up in beta because your lifeguard is going, watch the road. And of course it does that because the cost of missing danger is so high. So your brain liner learned the world wasn't so predictable. And you validate the experience, you validate the physiology. You don't say they don't have PTSD, but you're not necessarily buying into that tight DSM landscape. And people come to us, I would say usually, even when they're kids, the parents come to us educated. They know what they're experiencing. They know what people have called it already. They know the symptoms they're experiencing. And so if you just break it down into the resources that you want to work on and what does success and goals look like, not eliminating diagnostic, but what does control over that resource look like? That's what we work on. And it's the same stuff. It's these regulatory things, these 8 things that we all end up working on. We're working on the diagnostic labels. They actually show up across labels, shockingly. Phenotypes are not as precise. They're buckets, the same buckets as the DSM is. They cross those labels. So
Santiago, where are you performing next? What I'm trying to do is we're at the end, and if anybody wants to stay past, we got a couple minutes left in the hour. Whoever wants to stay past, I will stick around. But Santiago, you're in Singapore. What you have so many more advertisements coming up. You are all over the place. What's next for you?
I fly next week. I'm going to Texas to teach with my good friends of In Mind Out. So I'm going to be teaching a neurofeedback and a QEEG class there. And then from there, I go to Chicago to the ISNR meeting where I'm teaching a half-day workshop on.
Wait, you're coming by my house?
I am coming by your house.
All right.
We're going to have a barbecue and everything, yeah. Right? So, yeah, I'm going to ISNR. I'm doing a half-day workshop on looking at raw EEG tracings. And then from there, I jump to Romania, where I'm teaching for 3 days with the people from iMedisync, and then back to California for the Switzerland Summit.
What's going on with the Koreans? Anybody, you got anything to say before you pop out?
Regarding the Koreans?
iMedisync, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just finished that lecture for them on ADD, ADHD, and EEG, attended basically by psychiatrists, and about 100 people attended. It included some people. There was a cluster from Canada because Grosh the psychiatrist who presented with me, because I can't present by myself. Obviously, I'm just a tech, so I've got to have a name on the marquee other than me. So there was a Canadian group, but the largest group is actually from Brazil, and we had a Portuguese translator that did live translation, and she kept up with me.
That was AI, Jay. I believe that was AI.
They actually have.
No, I'm serious. I think that was.
They have a woman who does the Portuguese translation for medical. She's specifically good at it.
Okay,
so anyway,
I was in that talk. I was convinced that those different language translations were actually coming via AI based on the way they were paced, but I could be wrong. My Portuguese is super rusty.
I only knew that they had the Portuguese. I didn't know that there were any other languages other than English and Portuguese. You could even select on that. So,
Jay,
anyway,
Irish anytime you want. Joy, if you want to hop in, go ahead.
I want to just finish that the talk went well enough that I ended up with a cluster of folks who wanted to contract with me on the EEG stuff, and I basically tell them, hey, I agreed to do this, but I'm retired. I can't sign on to a whole bunch of other new projects, and the Koreans have other resources other than me, obviously, and the folks that are excited and want to jump in have other portals than coming through me, because I'm not a way in anymore. So,
all right, we're at the hour. Anthony, John Mekrut, Dr. Andrew Hill, Joy. Anybody want to stick around? Jay, I'll see you in the morning.
I am not going to stick around today because this is 9/11, and in my house it's my son's birthday, so we celebrate today while we acknowledge just what took place on this date years ago. So I'm off to pick up a birthday cake.
Congratulations, Mom.
Happy birthday to your son.
Thank you. Yes,
thanks, Joy.
Was quite a day.
Oh,
yeah, I bet.
Especially in 2001.
Well, yeah, but he was born in 86, so he had the date first.
Hey, everybody, thanks for showing up, and
thank you.
Peace out. Whoever wants to stick around, I'll be here. I got nothing else to do.
and when you say I'll see you in the morning, Pete, that has so many weird connotations. I don't even want to touch it.
Not saying anything.
Well, sounds
I'll
like
catch you all another time.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right.